Part 9. Rebirth of Fantasy, Obtain the Sect System. Author, Red General. Chapter 81. Qin Xian's indifferent voice appeared in the minds of the disciples in the square. The Sect martial arts meeting is about to begin, you should know what to do. All the disciples trembled, bowed their hands to Qin Xian in the sky, and then left here pretending to be nothing happened. Seeing everyone leaving, Qin Xian glanced at Song Shizu below and disappeared. In Tianqian Palace, Lin Tian held in his hands a clear-skinned woman with tender skin, a willow-thin waist, and a blue dress. It is the resurrected Xueling. Qin Xian didn't say anything, and with a wave of his hand, the two of them disappeared instantly. They have been teleported to Lin Tian's courtyard by Qin Xian. After all, it is also the main hall of the section. What is the point of lying here? 3 days later, there will be a Sect martial arts meeting. In the center of the square on the main peak of the Sect, a martial arts platform that can accommodate tens of thousands of people stands here. From time to time, disciples of Profound Heaven Sect are walking and talking around it. And Qin Xian is now high in the sky, overlooking the entire Sect's main peak with a pair of eyes that see through the world. The peak masters of the Sect are sitting in the void, sitting on the seats that appear out of thin air to watch, which is equivalent to giving guidance. In the square below, the disciples were seated in the 4 directions of southeast, northwest, and northwest. The disciples were watching from the east, west, and north, while those in the south were those who were conducting the martial arts meeting. Among them, Huo Yi and Yun Fenji were among the crowd. While everyone was talking, the figure of the great elder Linggu appeared in the center of the square. When everyone saw it, the noisy voice stopped instantly. Linggu moistened his ears and throat, and said loudly to everyone, "Today is the day of the martial arts meeting. For those of you who are promoted, I, the elder, would like to give you a kind instruction. This elder hopes that all of you who are participating in this martial arts competition will treat this martial arts battle well. Don't take it in a playful mood, but take it seriously. Otherwise, you will always be at the outer gate and unable to get in. Inner door, don't think that you can keep participating in the future and just do whatever you want. If you have this kind of mentality, your future will be in jeopardy." Well, that's it for this elder's words. Whether you listen or not is your own business. I hope you will take it seriously. Okay, that's it. Let's start the martial arts meeting now. The words have fallen. Qin Xian, who was high in the sky, waved his hand. A spiritual shield instantly appeared in front of each disciple in the 4 directions of southeast, northwest, and northwest. This thing was to protect their safety. After all, Qin Xian was not sure that some disciples won't be impatient anymore. The moment the shield appeared, a man wearing a green shirt and dark skin jumped into the center of the martial arts field. He has an average appearance and is not very good looking, but no one pays attention to his appearance. Some people glanced at his arms. If you look closely, you will find that there is a thick layer of skin on his arms, and his palms are covered with calluses. His skin is pure black. As expected, he should be a black man. A body-refining martial artist. Everyone in the south field couldn't help but stroke their chins. No one went up to fight him first. After all, participating in the inner sect competition requires the cultivation of martial spirit. Everyone's cultivation is similar, except for Yun Fenji. The freak is a martial king. They still understand that the first bird is shot, and they all stand by with their arms folded, watching the scene quietly. After a while, no one dared to go up. The man in green shirt couldn't help but became a little angry, and challenged everyone in the south field, "What a bunch of cowards. I just remembered that some of you wanted to teach me a lesson. Why now, I'm here. Why don't you dare? Ah! Are you afraid of my fists?" The man in green shirt waved his arm. Listening to the provocation of the man in green shirt, some people in the crowd couldn't bear it anymore and walked out. After all, None of them were over 20 years old. They were all young, energetic, and arrogant. "Guang Gan, are you looking for a fight? I've long noticed that you don't like me, so let me teach you a lesson today." Guang Qian glanced at him with contempt and said, "Oh, I want to see how you teach me a lesson." Guang Gan showed a look of disdain on his face, which really didn't deserve a beating. "You're looking for death," the man roared angrily. Then he used his body skills and appeared in front of Guang Qian at an extremely fast speed. He clenched his fist and punched hard into the abdomen. But it was a pity that Guang Qian had already noticed the speed and snorted coldly. When he was about to hit, Guang Qian ducked and appeared behind him, hugged his waist with both hands, and turned around a few times, then he threw it down heavily. With a bang, the man lost like this. He lost before he even showed his true strength. It was quite embarrassing. Guang Gan glanced coldly at the man lying on the ground. "You are so weak. You can't control your mind. You rush forward so recklessly. This is just giving me a chance." The words fell. Immediately, a Wuzong-level elder appeared in front of the two of them. The Wuzong elder glanced at Guang Gan with admiration, then wrapped his spiritual power around the man lying on the ground and disappeared. Seeing the elder's admiring eyes, Guang Gan raised his mouth and challenged everyone again, "Does anyone dare to come up and fight with me again? Don't be a coward." Seeing Guang Gan's arrogance, everyone said nothing and remained silent. Some people took this opportunity to analyze Guang Gan's offensive and defensive methods. Guang Gan saw their actions and didn't say anything. He just let them do whatever they wanted. In his eyes, as long as he was strong, everything was empty. When Xiao Ran, who was in the sky, saw this scene, he couldn't help but nodded slightly. Xiao Ran's face remained unchanged and he said, "The sect leader is right. The independent cultivator is ruthless. He is ruthless to himself and even more ruthless to others. This disciple was defeated before he even showed his true strength." Xiao Ran shook his head again. "Sure enough, this disciple still lacks actual combat experience, otherwise he would not have lost so quickly." Wu Huai on the side came over and said with a smile, "That's for sure. They all stay in the sect and rarely go out. It's normal to have no experience, so they need to train them more, otherwise they will be like the sect leader said." "Yeah, you raised some losers." Xiao Ran didn't speak and nodded slightly. In the martial arts field, Guang Qian stood majestically, his eyes sweeping towards everyone with disdain. Only when he glanced at Yun Fengji, his eyes couldn't help but reveal a hint of fear. After all, Yun Fengji has reached the realm of martial king at the age of less than 18 years old. Such talent is simply amazing in the eyes of others. I am afraid that except Lin Tian, the second disciple of the sect master, who can compare with it? At least in Guang Qian's eyes, it is. He had been taught a lesson by Yun Fengji before. At that time, he was bored and panicked. When he saw how beautiful Yun Fengji was, he couldn't help but have a disgusting thought in his heart. As a result, he was beaten until his nose was bruised and his face was swollen, and his arm was even severed. Well, if he hadn't used a lot of spiritual stones to ask someone to help him look at it, his left hand wouldn't be healed yet. Thinking of this, Guang Qian quickly avoided Yun Fengji's eyes and did not look at her again, but turned to others. As for Wei Songshis, who did not participate this time, it was because he was not yet a disciple of Profound Heaven sect, but just mixed up with Zhao Lei and became a brother. And this martial arts meeting is for Profound Heaven sect disciples to advance to the inner sect, not for him, so naturally he cannot participate. When Huo Yi, who was behind the crowd, saw this scene, a purple-blue flame appeared in his palm. Rebirth of Fantasy, Obtain the Sect System. Author, Red General. Chapter 82. He pondered, his strength is about martial spirit 7th layer, and my strength is only martial spirit 2nd layer. Looking at this man's fighting style just now, you can understand that he has extremely rich combat experience. I can fight him head-on with my strength. If so, I will definitely be defeated within 3 breaths. Huo Yi frowned slightly, clenched his fists and said secretly, no, if you want to become a double cultivator of Dan and Wu, you must go through this step. Losing is not terrible, the terrible thing is that you dare not fight. Having said this, he walked straight to the center of the martial arts field without any further hesitation. When he came on stage, everyone watching around couldn't help but ask questions. Who is that? Why have I never seen this person before? You don't know him? He is the direct disciple of the current Elixir Peak Master. The man looked a little surprised. What? A direct disciple? Then why did he come to participate in the martial arts meeting? His identity should have no effect on him participating in the martial arts meeting. The man shook his head and said, according to my inside information, this person is determined to come to this martial arts meeting. Isn't he afraid of being beaten? Doesn't the person who makes Elixir Peak only know how to make pills? His cultivation level must not have caught up yet, right? Huo Yi, who was in the martial arts field, naturally heard such words. The noisy voices entered his mind, but his expression was extremely calm and did not change because of everyone's doubts. After all, what alchemist needs is soul power, and being number 1 in alchemy has nothing to do with strength. Thinking of this, his eyes showed a hint of determination, and the flames in his palms burned more intensely. Purple-blue flames surrounded his whole body, and the flames turned into small snakes and began to swim around him. In this situation, it is not difficult to guess that he is about to release his ultimate move. I don't know if this move can defeat you, Huo Yan whispered. Guang Gan, who was opposite him, felt a sense of threat coming from Huo Yi. His expression gradually became serious and he began to look at his opponent. Maybe this person was lower in cultivation than him, but the flames made him his soul was actually a little scared. He didn't know what was going on, but his instinct told him that he must use all his strength. A black sword appeared in Guang Qian's palm, and the sword was surrounded by waves of evil energy. Looking at the knife in his hand, Guanggan's eyes no longer showed fear. This knife has been with him since he was a mortal, and he has experienced ups and downs, life and death crises with him. He was able to reach this state, and 9 of his achievements were attributed to this knife. He didn't know whether this knife was a spirit weapon. He only knew that anything that could kill people was a spirit weapon. Wild Wave Sword Technique, Guang Gan shouted. The blade of the sword evaporated and shot out several streaks of black sword energy, directly attacking Huo Yi. But Huo Yi was already on guard. From the moment he came on the stage, the others were always vigilant. The flames on his body instantly turned into a series of spiritual snakes, which gathered on the index finger of the flame and turned into a fiery red flood dragon. Huo Yi waved forward, and the fire dragon roared, rushing straight away with ferocious flames. With a bang, the sword energy was instantly shattered, but the furious flood dragon did not disappear completely, and its whole body kept swinging to Guanggan rushed away. No, Guanggan was shocked when his own attack was directly shattered. He didn't have time to use his sword energy to resist, so he quickly took out a magic circle from the space ring. The moment Flood Dragon collided with him, a defensive magic circle appeared. In front of him, he blocked this fatal blow for him. Boom! The Flood Dragon crashed straight into the magic circle. The dragon's head kept roaring and its tail kept swinging. However, after a few breaths, the Flood Dragon gradually began to dissipate without the spiritual power to maintain it. But the defensive array was also shattered. My heart hurts. This magic circle cost me hundreds of spirit stones. Seeing that his magic circle was broken, Guang Qian's heart ached. But he shook his head. However, it doesn't matter if you sacrifice these things in order to enter the inner gate. Then he looked up at Huo Yi and said, if you have any other skills, use them as soon as possible. Huo Yi didn't say anything. This move had already consumed half of his spiritual energy. A pill appeared in his hand and he swallowed it. After replenishing his spiritual energy, his eyes flashed with fire. The purple-blue flame in the palm of his hand became more and more intense. Huo Yi raised his eyes and looked at Guan Gan opposite, and said in a deep voice, "The flames have been charged, and you will be defeated next." As soon as he finished speaking, all the purple-blue flames on his body left his body and gathered into the mid-air. The next moment, a huge python came out of thin air, with a pair of fierce eyes staring at Guan Gan. It looked like want to eat it. What kind of move is this? Wu Huai, who was in mid-air, couldn't help but look puzzled when he saw this move. I didn't expect this little guy to learn this trick. My hard work was all in vain. Xiao Ran couldn't help but chuckle when he saw this trick. Then he looked at Wu Huai and explained to him, "This move is not a martial arts technique, but the effect of the flame I gave him. It can be regarded as a self-created martial arts technique." After all, Xiao Ran had also used this trick in his previous life. The giant python moved its body, and its huge head hit Guan Gan directly. I was afraid that Guan Gan would be torn apart as soon as it hit him. However, Guan Gan, who was on the opposite side, had no intention of resisting. This move was completely beyond his control. He couldn't resist the realm of martial spirit. This move was already half a step to the strength of the martial king. When the giant python rushed within 1 centimeter of Guan Gan's body, an old man's figure appeared in front of him. With a calm expression and a tap of his fingers, the giant python directly turned into a stream of spiritual power and disappeared in front of him. Seeing this, Guan Gan said respectfully, "Thank you very much, elder." The old man smiled, patted his shoulder and said, "You performed very well this time. You can enter the inner door. Get in." Guan Gan's eyes flashed with disbelief. According to the rules of the competition, if you want to enter the inner gate, you must defeat 3 opponents. He has only defeated 1 so far, and he doesn't understand why he can enter. Guan Gan showed a trace of doubt and looked at the old man. The old man put his hands on his back and explained to him, "Actually, there is another rule for the martial arts competition, but it's just not said out loud. This competition will test your reactions and fighting experience. The major peak masters above have already seen it. Your competition is very good. You have complied with the rules of the inner gate, so you can naturally enter." A trace of excitement flashed across Guan Qian's expression. He suppressed the happiness and excitement in his heart and respectfully said to the old man, "Thank you, elder, for informing me." The old man nodded. Huo Yi on the other side saw the scene and smiled. From the moment the elder appeared, he had already won. As for why he was not afraid of killing Guan Gan accidentally. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of Fantasy, Obtain the Sect System. Author, Red General. Chapter 83. That's because he knew that the elders would come to the rescue in time. Otherwise, even if he was given 100 courages, Huo Yi would not dare to do this. Don't forget that the sect leader Qin Xian and the major peak masters are watching this scene. Even if the elder fails to save the situation in time, Qin Xian will take action in time, as will the major peak masters. The next few fights were extremely boring. Although we also encountered some troublesome people, these troublesome people were nothing more than independent cultivator martial artists. However, in the opinion of some people, Huo Yi was able to win because of his flames, so many people refused to accept it. In this way, after 5 fights, those who refused to accept were beaten with bruises and bruises. The final winner was Huo Yi. This time no one dared to say a word of dissatisfaction. Even though he had won so many games, Huo Yi still showed no disdain and his face remained calm. Because Xiao Ran told him that no matter why you win, you must always maintain a calm expression. In this way, The martial arts meeting lasted for most of a day, and the final winner was Huo Yi. As for why his spiritual power has not been exhausted yet, that must be attributed to his alchemy skills. Huo Yi had prepared a large number of elixirs to restore spiritual power in advance, otherwise his spiritual power would have been exhausted in the fight with Guan Gan. When everyone saw this scene, they didn't dare to say anything. After all, others can make elixirs, so why can't they prepare elixirs for themselves? They are all the same, they are not talented enough, they are not favored by the elders, they do not have a lot of resource support, and they cannot afford so many elixirs. When Yun Fengji, who was among the crowd, saw this scene, his eyes flashed with surprise. After all, as an alchemist, it was understandable that he could fight like this with so many martial spirits. But his surprised eyes dimmed instantly, he shook his head and murmured, "This Huo Yi's strength is pretty good, but unfortunately his strength is too low to be my opponent. Unless his strength breaks through the martial king, no matter what happens, you can never defeat me." High in the sky, Qin Xian's delicate face did not change, and his pair of deep eyes looked at the scene quietly. Qualification, high grade. Realm, martial spirit second layer. Age, 17. Physique, Dan spirit body. If this son is trained properly, I'm afraid he will be as good as his master Xiao Ran. If I draw out a treasure like the lucky pearl next time, I can reward you. After all, I like people like you who are neither arrogant nor impetuous, with perseverance a courageous genius. Qin Xian smiled slightly. At this moment, a man in black robes with a cold face and deep eyes walked up to the battlefield. He stepped to the opposite side of Huo Yi. Huo Yi raised his eyes and looked at him, feeling a bad feeling in his heart. He felt that the aura on this person was extremely powerful, and it was not something he could deal with now. But you still have to be polite. Huo Yi raised his hand and asked, "I wonder who you are? Can you tell me your name?" The man in black robe looked at Huo Yi with a pair of black eyes and replied coldly, "My name is Bloodthirsty." Blood devouring, Huo Yi shook his head. He had never heard of this person before and then said, "Your Excellency, let us fight now. What do you think?" Bloodthirsty had no expression on his face. He nodded and shook his head, then said, "You are too weak. I don't want to seriously hurt you. I'll give you a chance and retreat." Huo Yi frowned slightly, it was too arrogant. When he was about to refute, a voice came into his mind. "You should step back first. This man's strength has reached that of a martial king. You are not his opponent yet." Hearing that it was his master speaking, Huo Yi didn't refute anymore, he bowed his hands to Bloodthirsty and walked away. This situation caused exclamations and doubts from all directions. They didn't understand why Huo Yi, who had won consecutive battles just now, surrendered like this. But the person in the martial arts field who was still there was Bloodthirsty. When he saw Huo Yi retreating like this, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows and said to himself, "You are quite sensible." Then he turned around, glanced at the people in the south field, and directly saw a woman, Yun Fengji. A smile appeared on his face, and he raised his hands to an unknown place nearby and shouted, "Elder, can I name you for a duel?" Hearing this, the space trembled, and the old man came out, looked at Suithili, nodded and said, "It's okay, but it must be agreed by others, and it cannot be forced." His eyes flashed at the corner of his bloodthirsty mouth, he looked down at Yun Fengji and said with his finger, "I want to challenge this woman." As soon as Bloodthirsty said these words, everyone in the arena started talking. After all, Yun Fengji's talent and strength were top-notch, and usually no one dared to challenge him. Who is this person? He wants to challenge Fairy Yunfen? Is he looking for death? The people around him shook their heads, "I don't know. But looking at his expression, he doesn't seem to be joking. Maybe he has some strength. Didn't you see that Huo Yi retreated on his own initiative just now? It seems so. How can I challenge it if I don't have any strength? After hearing this, everyone around them said nothing and continued to watch quietly. Yun Fengji raised her eyes, looked at Shuexia and nodded slightly. Then he disappeared and reappeared in the field. Yun Fengji looked at Bloodthirsty and said, "You are very similar to a friend of mine. Your temperament is very similar to the clothes he likes to wear." Bloodthirsty said nothing, moved his body, and a trace of murderous intent flashed in his eyes. In an instant, traces of black aura surrounded its body, turning into black heads one after another. The strength of its own Martial King's seventh layer was exuded at this moment. This aura made everyone watching slightly surprised, with a hint of disbelief on their faces. After all, among the disciples they knew, there was no such person as Bloodthirsty, let alone such a genius. "My guess is indeed correct, you are that person." Feng Yunyi felt the black aura and frowned. Bloodthirsty smiled, and the black spiritual energy all over his body gathered in his hands. "Stop talking. This is a battle between you and me. You have to take it seriously." After Bloodthirsty finished speaking, a stream of will-o'-the-wisp surrounded Bloodthirsty's fingers and hit Yun Fengji. Wherever the will-o'-the-wisps spread, they leave a foul smell. Seeing the incoming will-o'-the-wisp, Yun Fengji waved her palm. "As expected, this is the trick, then let you and I end it from here." Yun Fengji directly used her strongest killing move. Waves of golden light emerged from behind her, until a phoenix silhouette slowly appeared in front of everyone. Chirp! A phoenix's cry echoed in everyone's ears. A golden sword appeared in the palm of Yun Fengji's hand. She raised the sword in her hand, pointed it at the sky, and shouted, "Fengyi kills with 100 moves? Rebirth of Fantasy, obtain the Sect system." Author, Red General. Chapter 84. The phantom of the phoenix circled around Yun Fengji several times, and then rushed straight into the sky. When it reached a certain distance, it leaned down and rushed downwards. The attacking will-o'-wisp was instantly surrounded by golden light and turned into flying objects. "Cigarette! Chirp!" The phoenix screamed again. The golden light of the phoenix set off her unparalleled feathers. Its wings flapped up and down, speeding up instantly as she rushed in front of the Bloodthirsty. Shuexia looked at the charging phoenix and snorted coldly, "Do you really think this trick can still be useful to me?" As he finished speaking, the will-o'-the-wisp in his hand became more intense, and his bloodthirsty fingers played with the will-o'-the-wisp. It seemed like he was playing with it, but the will-o'-the-wisp grew bigger and bigger until it turned into an unknown demon that was 10 feet tall. The demon made a strange cry and rushed forward. Boom, bang. The two sides collided together, and this astonishing power made everyone feel that this was not a battle between martial kings, but a life and death battle between martial sovereigns. This made everyone feel that even the real martial sovereigns would not be able to withstand these two moves. Attack! High in the sky, Qin Xian stood with his hands behind his hands, looking down at the ground, muttering to himself, "Is this the battle between Son of Fortune and Son of Fortune? It's really interesting." Yes, Bloodthirsty is Son of Fortune, and like Yun Fengji, he is reborn. In the previous life, the two of them were mortal enemies of each other. Bang! The spiritual power of the collision between the dim light and the golden light caused the void to tremble. This scene was a feast for the eyes of everyone around. What a terrifying power! Are the two of them really martial king? I'm afraid even the powerful martial king doesn't have such power, right? A man in the crowd exclaimed. Because both of them are geniuses, they have reached the martial king realm at such an age and have no rivals at the same level, so the battle between geniuses is the most exciting, one person said excitedly with his eyes shining. Just as they were talking, Yun Fengji and Bloodthirsty started fighting instantly on the martial arts field. Their spiritual power was radiating, and both of them had minor wounds on their bodies. Bang bang bang. There was another fight, and both sides took 3 steps back. Xue Xue took a breath, looked at Yun Fengji and snorted coldly. If my strength breaks through to Lord Wu, I may be able to defeat you, but unfortunately there is not enough time. In the end, our strength is still the same. Xue Xie shook his head. Yun Fengji said nothing. Yun Fengji, do you think the two of us are destined for each other? We were mortal enemies in the last life, and so are we in this life. We couldn't defeat each other, and we happened to be reborn together. To be honest, I couldn't help but start to suspect that it was the law of heaven playing with us. Yun Fengji still didn't speak and pursed her lips. Although she was also confused as to why the two of them were reborn together. Maybe it was the arrangement of heaven or fate, but these were not important. What was important was the battle between the two. Thinking of this, the sword in Yun Fengji's hand once again glowed with golden light. Seeing this scene, Bloodthirsty knew what she was going to do. He grinned and said, "Come on. Let's see how this move compares to the last one." Qi Ming Fengzhan. A cry of phoenix came out from the sword in Yun Fengji's hand again. In an instant, a sword energy with the phantom of the phoenix went straight towards Bloodthirsty's neck. Bloodthirsty smiled coldly and shouted, "Destroy all demons." After finishing his bloodthirsty words, the will-o'-the-wisps all over his body mixed into a demon head with teeth and claws. The devil infant screamed and collided with the sword energy. Bang! Another collision of spiritual energy. This move caused slight damage to the entire square ground. The ground sank half a meter, and small holes appeared. Before it was over, the bloodthirsty will-o'-the-wisp enveloped itself and disappeared. Before Yun Fengji could react, she appeared directly in front of her and punched her down. Boom! Yun Fengji was hit directly in the chest and retreated straight away. Her clothes were torn, revealing her snow-white skin. This scene caused everyone watching to scream in surprise, wishing they could rush onto the field and be rescued by a hero. They had never seen Yun Fengji in such a miserable state, which made them heartbroken. Yun Fengji covered her chest with her hands, half knelt on the ground, spit out a mouthful of blood, and said calmly with a movement of her clear eyes, "You really still like to play sneak attacks." Yun Fengji didn't show any sign of pain, and her face never changed at all. Bloodthirsty glanced at Yun Fengji with a smile and said, "This is not called a sneak attack, this is called adaptability. After all, a sneak attack is also a kind of strength, isn't it?" Yun Fengji snorted coldly and didn't reply. Pills kept appearing in his hand. These were pills that could restore spiritual power and recover from injuries. Yun Fengji threw it into her mouth as if she didn't want the money. In less than a few breaths, Yun Fengji's deep wounds began to heal, and her spiritual power gradually began to replenish. The sword in his hand waved again, but the bloodthirsty on the other side didn't matter. He quite liked fighting like this. After all, the two of them were strong men at the top of the Emperor realm in the previous life. Every time they fought, they couldn't cause any harm to each other and they couldn't see each other. The two looked embarrassed. Bloodthirsty is happy now. "That's enough, you two can stop," an old man's voice came from their ears. Then the old man's figure appeared in the center of the martial arts field. It was the Wuzong elder who came to stop him on Qin Xian's order. After all, no matter how hard the Son of Fortune fights, there will be no winner or loser in the end, and Qin Xian is too lazy to watch anymore, as this will affect subsequent martial arts meetings. When the two saw this, they didn't say anything more. After all, after living for so long, they could clearly see that it was the powerful person in the sect who had spoken. The two of them cupped their hands and said, "Yes, elder." With that said, this duel ended without a trace. Although there were many exciting fights that followed, none of them were as exciting as those between Bloodthirsty and Yun Fengtian, and they could not attract everyone's excitement. This is normal in itself. When people see better things, they will belittle the bad things. This is human nature. The martial arts meeting lasted for 3 full days. Who are the top 10 people this time? On the top of a mountain, Qin Xian drank tea and asked Xiao Ran opposite. Xiao Ran heard the question and answered, Sect Master, they are. But first and second place is not easy to determine. Qin Xian nodded. He naturally knew that after all, Yun Fengji and Bloodthirsty were both equally powerful, and he didn't know who would give him the first or second place. After thinking for a moment, Qin Xian said, there is no need to worry about these two. After 1 month, you can take these 10 people to the Central Territory. Yes, Sect Master. Then Qin Xian waved his hand to tell Xiao Ran to retreat. Seeing this, Xiao Ran held his hands and retreated. Then a man in a mysterious robe appeared in front of Qin Xian. It was the man Qin Xian bought on the system character interface that day. His name is Lei Wuxian. Rebirth of Fantasy, obtain the Sect system. Author, Red General. Chapter 85. Half a month later. A space crack about 10 meters long appeared in the sky, and the shaking of space caused nearby monsters to run away in a hurry. Boom! A giant spirit boat that was 100 feet long flew out slowly. There was a big word Xian written on the left and right sides of the spirit boat. These were the people of Profound Heaven Sect. After completing the martial arts competition, Xiao Ran led the top 10 disciples of the martial arts competition plus some elder peak masters to the central region according to what Qin Xian said. On the spirit boat, Xiao Ran felt the richness of the spiritual energy and couldn't help but sigh, I haven't tasted the richness of this spiritual energy for an unknown amount of time. It's been tens of thousands of years, and I'm finally back. I wonder Ziyun, how are you doing now? Xiao Ran looked far away and murmured. The other side. Yun Fenjiun and Xue Xue, who were practicing, opened their eyes, stood up and walked outside. It happened that the two of them bumped into each other. Bloodthirsty couldn't help but be a little surprised, but he quickly hid it and said jokingly, hey, isn't this the famous fairy Yunfen? If you don't practice in the temple, why would you come outside? Yun Fengji rolled her eyes, said nothing, and turned towards the bow of the ship. Seeing that Yun Fengji didn't reply to his words, Bloodthirsty didn't care. The two of them had been mortal enemies for many years, and their personalities were clearly understood. A smile appeared on the Bloodthirsty lips, and he murmured to himself, returning to the central realm after so many years, I can't help but let my thoughts go back to that time. In addition to being bloodthirsty, Xiao Ran and others lamented that a group of people were practicing hard, and they were the disciples who were participating in the martial arts competition. The concentration of spiritual energy in the Central Territory is much stronger than that in their section. It is best for them to take this opportunity to work hard to improve their cultivation. After all, they do not have Son of Fortune and 10,000 years of experience. It's your own efforts. The spirit boat walked slowly for 3 more days. After all, there was still almost half a month before the conference started, so there was no need to rush there. In 3 days, they also experienced attacks by monsters and robberies by independent cultivators, but without exception, these people were eliminated one by one. Don't forget, Qin Xian sent 2 semi-saint peak experts to protect them. The spirit boat traveled for another half a day until a majestic and slightly towering city came into view. I saw the 2 characters Wuchen written on it. The spirit boat slowly approached Wuchen. As they approached, there would be people running in front of them on monster from time to time. Without exception, these people had received invitations to participate in the 5 realms competition and obtain the Tianqian secret realm. Qualifications. There are even several strong martial saints among them. No one who is short-sighted dares to challenge them. After all, Tianqian Arc is no longer a spiritual boat at the peak of the profound rank. It has reached the peak of the earth level and can defend against the attacks of the peak martial saint. As long as no one, it's okay. When you're full, you usually won't come here to make trouble. This was drawn by Qin Xian in a lottery, which just solved his urgent need of not having a powerful spiritual boat at that time. After all, to participate in the Five Realms competition to obtain the qualifications for the Tianqian Secret Realm, you must not lose your qualifications, otherwise you will be looked down upon by others. In the eyes of the strong, there is no place for the weak. When Tian Xianzhou was about to enter Wuchen, several soldiers guarding the city stepped over near Wuchen. Without exception, they were all powerful men above the martial venerable 7th layer. Xiao Ran saw them coming and knew what to do, so he handed the invitation out. The city guard soldiers glanced at the invitation and waved to the people behind them. Seeing this, several people moved out of the way. Everyone on the Tianqian arc said nothing, and some people knew Xiao Ran's identity. Although some disciples were curious, they did not dare to ask. The time for a cup of tea passed in a blink of an eye, and the Tianqian arc stopped in an open space 10,000 feet in size. Xiao Ran led everyone down slowly, the space ring in his hand lit up slightly, and the Tianqian arc behind him was taken in. As people walked through the crowd, they could hear conversations between other people from time to time, and there were also a lot of compliments. They were all people who came to make friends with powerful people. Although some people came over to express condolences to Xiao Ran refused without exception. He doesn't like to go anywhere. You praise me and I praise you and so on. They are here to obtain the qualifications to enter the Tianqian Secret Realm, and they are not here to engage in sophistication. Unless he was a martial emperor, he would not even look at a semi-saint. Xiao Ran's strength slowly improved, and Xiao Ran's proud character was revealed. After all, he was a rebellious and domineering great emperor of Tianlong in his previous life. Under Xiao Ran's guidance, everyone walked to a palace covering an area of 10,000 acres. This is the place to receive people participating in the Five Realms competition. Xiao Ran looked at the palace and waved to the people behind him, indicating that they should follow. After half a stick of incense, everyone walked to the center of the palace, and when they were about to find a place to stay, an old man wearing a Chinese robe with a smile came over. He smiled and asked, "I wonder where you are from. Can you tell me?" Xiao Ran glanced at him and said nothing. Leng Wu, who was behind him, stood up and replied, "We are coming from the Eastern Domain." Eastern Domain. The old man nodded, then his expression changed, and he exclaimed, "The Eastern Domain is a good place. I heard my friend say that not only is the spiritual energy of the Eastern Domain weak, but even the strongest person is no more than a martial venerable strong person." Ling originally thought he was here to praise them, but he didn't expect that he was here to ridicule them. Ling's face darkened slightly. Seeing this, the old man said again, "I would like to advise you that it is better not to participate in this five-realm competition. After all, the qualifications for the Tianqian Secret Realm are not something that a person with low strength like you can have." Ling's expression changed and he frowned slightly. He wanted to kill this idiot. But what the old man said is right. Eastern Domain is indeed a person with meager spiritual energy, and the highest strength is only martial venerable. That's like a young man in Kyoto looking at rural people. But they are different. The force behind them is the profound heaven section. There are two semi-saint strongmen accompanying them this time. The old man's words naturally attracted everyone who passed by. They all crossed their arms and looked at the scene with playful eyes, except for eating melon seeds. As for why the old man came over to taunt them for no reason, that was because the old man had just lost a bet with others and was a little angry. He was so angry that he came to them to find a sense of presence. His own strength has also reached semi-saint, and the highest apparent strength of profound heaven sect is just a martial venerable strongman. Naturally, he became the target of frustration. Don't think of people too simply. Some people just like comparison and vanity. After all, this kind of thing happens all the time in the Central Territory, which is why there is such a saying, "There is never a seat for the weak among the strong." Just when the old man wanted to say something else, a figure appeared behind him out of thin air. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of Fantasy, Obtain the Sect System. Author, Red General. Chapter 86. The palm directly broke through his chest, smashing his internal organs. The old man's joking face began to stiffen, and he turned his head and looked back blankly. Before he could scream, a large amount of energy suddenly appeared in his body. Thunder and lightning, just like that, the old man who had been sarcastic and mocking just now was turned into ashes without resting in peace. The person who took action was none other than Lei Wuxian. He was instructed by Qin Xian to do nothing unless someone was stronger than them. Otherwise, whenever you encounter someone who dares to say something disgusting, just do it directly without holding back. In the central realm, one must learn to be ruthless, no matter if one is a man or a woman. This can be considered as a warning to the monkeys. Xiao Ran's expression did not change as he watched this scene, but he looked at Lei Wuxian with slight curiosity. In his impression, he had never seen such a strong person in the sect. Lei Wuxian looked at the ashes on the ground with an indifferent expression, and glanced at everyone. His meaning was clear. Anyone who dares to disgust others can go see the King of Hell. Seeing this situation, everyone had nothing to be afraid of. After all, there were even the strongest semi-saints behind them, even Martial Saint. But when they started fighting over a disagreement, they still didn't dare to offend him. After all, fighting with a madman was a losing job. They came here to obtain qualifications for Tianqian's secret realm this time, not to fight. Then he pretended to be nonchalant and went looking for his own place to live. Lei Wuxian stared at the scene with his eyes and said nothing. The breath throughout his body gradually became calmer, until he became like a mortal. Say it. Xiao Ran once again took everyone to find a place to stay. After nearly half a stick of incense, he finally found a courtyard covering an area of 100 feet. There was a spiritual barrier blocking their car outside the courtyard gate. When Xiao Ran saw it, he took out his advice again and threw it inside. Bah! Qing Jian came into contact with the spiritual barrier and disappeared instantly. This actually caused the people behind him to scream in surprise. They all came from the countryside, how could they see such top-notch things? Linggu and other peak masters did not speak. Linggu had lived in the central region and had naturally seen such things. Everyone stepped in. The spiritual barrier at the gate rose again. Every force has the qualification to live in the courtyard, and the function of the spiritual barrier is to protect the entire courtyard from any intrusion. It can also block the attacks of half-emperors. This is also to prevent taking advantage of the situation to oppress others, and to protect the weak. Let's stay here for now. I'm going to go outside first and see what the rules of the 5-domain competition are, Xiao Ran said to everyone. Everyone nodded. The words fell. Xiao Ran walked out of the courtyard. It seemed like he was going to ask about the rules of the competition, but in fact he was going out to do something. As for the rules of the competition, he already knew it. How could he not know the old rules that have not been changed for tens of thousands of years? When Linggu saw this scene, he didn't say anything. He walked to a table and chair and took a sip of tea. Such good tea can only be tasted in the central region. Each sip is equivalent to 10 high-grade spiritual stones entering the mouth. After walking out of the courtyard, Xiao Ran changed his clothes, wearing black, a black face mask, and a treasure that could hold his breath. After looking around, he walked out of the palace and walked into the noisy market. Xiao Ran walked nearby. Although some people looked at him curiously, they did not come up to talk to him. After all, some people like to keep a low profile, and it would be bad if they accidentally offend a strong person. But when Xiao Ran ran away, a black figure had already followed him. The man's blood-red eyes flashed and he grinned. After half a stick of incense, Xiao Ran arrived at a brothel with the name Gaiyu Tower written on it. Looking at the attic in front of him, Xiao Ran had a lot of thoughts. In his previous life, he had a friend here. Although the relationship was not good, at least he would not cheat him. After all, the two had an agreement. I wonder if he is still here. Xiao Ran stepped in, and from time to time, a charming-looking woman would come over to say something, whether she wanted something or not. But without exception, Xiao Ran ignored them. Walking to the third floor of the attic, Xiao Ran looked around. The changes are quite big. The brothel here is a confusing place with a universe inside. Only those who have been here can know. Xiao Ran came to a place selling weapons. A middle-aged man was lying on a chair leisurely, with a feather fan swinging gently. Looking at this middle-aged man, Xiao Ran's eyes moved. He walked closer and knocked on the table. Boom! The man opened his eyes, glanced at Xiao Ran, and said lazily, "You can see for yourself what this young master wants." Then he closed his eyes. Xiao Ran didn't pay attention to this little thing and asked, "I wonder if the shop owner knows a person named Wu Yu." After hearing this, the middle-aged man sat up instantly, frowned, looked at Xiao Ran, and said coldly, "What are you looking for him for?" Hearing the middle-aged man's unkind tone, Xiao Ran didn't mind, and a flute appeared in his hand. Handed it over. The middle-aged man looked at the flute in Xiao Ran's hand and took it over. His eyes narrowed. This is, the middle-aged man seemed to have seen something unbelievable, and his eyes narrowed slightly. Sighing, he looked at Xiao Ran and said, "It seems that you are an old friend of the master." "That's it, then come with me." Xiao Ran nodded and followed him to the back of the store. There were many wooden boxes there and they were dusty. It looked like they hadn't been cleaned for a long time. I saw a middle-aged man waving his hands, and nearby things moved aside to the left and right. A broken wooden door appeared in their eyes. The middle-aged man pushed it forward with both hands. The wooden door opened and a trace of dust fell down. Xiao Ran waved his hand and followed him in. What came into view was a deep black hole with no bottom. Xiao Ran looked at the black hole. Both areas of the cave are illuminated by torches. The two of them walked inside without saying a word, and there was a sound of footsteps in the cave. Half an hour later, the middle-aged man took Xiao Ran to a place, the hall. There was nothing in the hall except a dark coffin in the middle, which was covered with a red cloth. The middle-aged man walked over, lifted up the red cloth, and then pushed out the coffin lid with all his strength. At this moment, vicissitudes of sound sounded from inside the coffin. "Xiao Matzi, why are you looking for me?" The middle-aged man lowered his head and said respectfully, "Master, someone who claims to be your old friend is here to see you." "Old friend?" The old voice seemed to have a hint of surprise. Then, an old man with white hair and beard, wearing a white robe, and a face full of wrinkles appeared in front of Xiao Ran. Xiao Ran looked at him and smiled, and said, "I haven't seen him for many years, but I hope you are fine again." Rebirth of Fantasy, obtain the Sect system. Author, Red General. Chapter 87. You are Xiao Ran. The old man's eyes seemed to be filled with disbelief. It's like someone who was supposed to be dead suddenly came to life. As for why Wu Yu could recognize Xiao Ran so directly? That's because Wu Yu will never forget Xiao Ran's eyes in his life. Whenever he sees these eyes, the domineering figure of Tianlong Great Emperor will appear in Wu Yu's mind. Xiao Ran smiled slightly, nodded, and said, "It's me, but I haven't seen you for a long time." Wu Yu regained his composure and dusted himself off. Then he waved to the middle-aged man beside him, telling him to step back. Seeing this, the middle-aged man stepped back respectfully. Wu Yu then looked at Xiao Ran and said with a smile on his wrinkled face, "I didn't expect that, logically speaking, you should be completely dead. I didn't expect that you still saved a hand back then." Xiao Ran nodded and said, I left this inadvertently back then. I thought it would never be useful in my life, but I didn't expect that I would use it at that time. Speaking of this, Xiaoran looked a little lonely. Sometimes he himself didn't understand why Xiun wanted to join forces with Guo to kill him. Was it just for his power and position? Wu Yu looked at Xiaoran's expression and said nothing. He could also understand the feeling of being betrayed. With a big wave of his hand, the neighborhood gradually began to change. I saw that the ground turned into a blue lake, and every step I took could make the sound of water stepping on the lake. The area near the cave also turned into an endless blue sky. The ability Wu Yu used was a trace of the power of law that a strong half-emperor could control. Half-emperors can control the power of space and form their own realm, which is what Wu Yu used. Then a table, 2 chairs, a pot of tea, and 2 emerald cups appeared in front of them. The old man made a gesture of invitation to Xiaoran, then walked closer, picked up the teapot and poured a cup into the cup opposite, then poured himself a cup before sitting on it. Xiaoran laughed, sat on it, picked up the cup and took a sip. He couldn't help but nodded. Yes, only I could drink such good tea in my previous life. I haven't tasted the taste of such high-grade spiritual tea for a long time. Wu Yu on the opposite side nodded and said, "That's natural. What was your identity in the previous life?" "That was the great emperor of the heavenly dragon resounding throughout the 5 realms continent. He was revered as the being most likely to break through to the semi-immortal realm." "Don't talk about tea, even if you are a holy soldier, someone will give it to you," Wu Yu said jokingly. What Wu Yu said was of course true. Back then, Xiaoran could just wave his hand and a large number of powerful people came to give gifts in person. But Xiaoran shook his head and said, "But all that doesn't belong to me anymore, does it?" After hearing this, the old man fell silent and frowned slightly. After a long time, he said, "You must have come back to the central region to take revenge on Xiun and the others, right?" Xiaoran didn't hide anything and nodded. "Then you have to think clearly. Although I have lived in seclusion, I still have my own information. As far as I know, the current master of Tiangong is Xiun. On the surface, although Tiangong has 7 martial emperors, that was before and now in Tiangong. As expected, there should be around 10 strong martial emperors. The strongest among them is your brother Guo. I heard that his and Xiun's strength is close to that level. If you want to take revenge, your current strength is still far behind. You have to wait until your strength increases, and you may be able to fight against them." Xiaoran didn't refute anything. After all, this was the truth. He stood up, shook his head and sighed. Looking away, he said slowly, "Of course I understand, and I also understand that now is not the time. But it's not that far away." Wu Yu raised his eyebrows. "Do you mean that you have joined the force?" Xiaoran nodded slowly. Wu Yu looked a little surprised. After all, Xiaoran was a rebellious person. How could he take the initiative to seek refuge with others despite his own arrogance? But he still asked, "I don't know, what level is the strongest person in your force?" Xiaoran chuckled lightly and shook his head, "I don't know, but his strength should have surpassed the level of martial emperor, maybe he has reached that stage." "What?" Wu Yu's eyes were slightly shocked and a little unbelievable. "Xiaoran, are you sure? You must understand that it is a semi-immortal realm. Profound Heaven continent has been able to break through to this realm for so long, only 2 fingers. Are you sure you haven't been cheated?" Hearing this, Xiaoran looked at him helplessly and said, "Am I so easy to deceive? Although my strength is gone, my tens of thousands of years of experience are still there. Will I be deceived by others? Is this possible?" "It seems so, but I care too much," Wu Yu laughed. "Stop talking about me, what's going on with your strength? Logically speaking, you should have reached the martial emperor realm at this time, but will you still stay in the half-emperor realm? I remember when I saw you in my previous life, you were already at the peak of martial saint at that time, and you were only half-emperor at this time. You won't slack off, right? When Wu Yu heard this, he looked helpless. He said, "Do you think everyone is you? My talent is incomparable. I am very satisfied if I can break through to half-emperor. After all, it is not easy to break through the martial emperor realm. Otherwise, there would not be so few powerful martial emperors on the mainland. I am afraid that even if I spend my whole life, I will not be able to break through this realm." Xiao Ran said nothing and touched his chin. Wu Yu's words were indeed correct. Not everyone had Xiao Ran's abnormal talent in his previous life. After thinking for a while, he looked at Wu Yu and said, "Do you want to consider the forces behind me? Perhaps he can help you break through to the martial emperor." Wu Yu did not reply, but shook his head and said, "Let me think about it. I will tell you the answer after this competition between me and Daba is over." Xiao Ran nodded slightly and did not try to persuade him. After all, the effect he wanted had been achieved. He also believed in Wu Yu and would eventually agree. He understood Wu Yu's character very well. "Say it. In that case, it's time for me to go back. Let's have a chat tomorrow." Wu Yu glanced at Xiao Ran, nodded, and waved his hand to cancel the barrier. Xiao Ran glanced at the area nearby, bowed his hands to Wu Yu and prepared to leave. But his voice came from behind again. "There is a person whose strength has reached the pinnacle of semi-saint following you. I advise you to be careful." Xiao Ran paused and walked straight out of the cave without looking back. Wu Yu looked at Xiao Ran's leaving figure, shook his head, and returned to the coffin. Rebirth of Fantasy, obtain the Sect system. Author, Red General. Chapter 88. Half an hour later. Xiao Ran walked out of the cave. The middle-aged man named Xiao Matzi was lying lazily on the chair. He seemed very leisurely, but his half-opened and half-squinted eyes already told the answer. He was lying on the chair lazily. Be vigilant at all times. Hearing the footsteps behind him, Xiao Matzi stood up quickly. He bowed his hands respectfully to Xiao Ran and said, "Senior, Junior, what I said just now offended me a lot, I hope you can forgive me." Xiao Ran didn't speak. He didn't mind such a trivial matter. He leaned over and helped him up and said, "After this 5-region competition is over, I will come over to find your master." Xiao Matzi nodded slightly. Then he patted his shoulder again to reassure him. After another cup of tea, Xiao Ran returned to the palace. Before entering the palace, he glanced back with a smile on his lips. "Have you discovered my existence?" the figure murmured and then walked out of the darkness. The black robe wrapped him tightly, and his face could not be seen at all, but his fishy eyes made people laugh. People couldn't help but start to feel scared. But he shook his head, it shouldn't be possible. How could he be aware of my existence with his strength? In the courtyard, Ling was playing chess with a peak master. There was no way, there was still nearly half a month before the 5-domain competition, and they really had nothing to do, so they could only pass the time by playing chess. Xiao Ran, who had just come back, happened to see the scene, leaned over and asked, "Has anyone come here to cause trouble?" Ling dropped the chess piece, shook his head and said, "No, Senior Lei Wuxian killed the chicken to scare the monkeys. Even if the people behind the old man came to retaliate, they would have to think carefully, not to mention the protective shield in the courtyard. They can't break it either." Xiao Ran nodded. Speaking of this, Ling remembered something and asked Xiao Ran, "By the way, have you asked about the rules of the 5 domains competition?" Xiao Ran nodded and replied, "Good morning, I will tell you in detail later." Ling nodded and said nothing more. Xiao Ran returned to his room and sat cross-legged to practice. After all, the spiritual energy in the central region is still very strong, and his current strength will soon break through to the Wuzong realm. Time passed in a blink of an eye, and half a month later, a deafening sound echoed throughout the palace. The 5-domain competition has begun. Everyone who has received the invitation is invited to come to the center of Wuchen to gather. As soon as these voices came out, everyone who was practicing in the palace opened their eyes, and then immediately ordered the people in their own power to pack up their things and rush to the center of Wuchen. Profound Heaven Sect. Everyone heard this naturally, but Xiaoran and others were not in a hurry. Xiaoran has already told Ling and others about the rules of this competition. At this moment, he was standing in the courtyard, looking at everyone with a serious expression, explaining the content of the 5 regions competition and so on. Except for Bloodthirsty and Yun Fenji, everyone else's expressions showed a hint of impatience. Of course, this is understandable. After all, the 5 domains competition brings together all the top geniuses in the Profound Heaven continent. They have also heard what their seniors said before about how good the 5 domains competition is and how many geniuses are gathered there. Even if they don't participate, watching it will be something they will be proud of for a lifetime. Ling and other major peak masters were naturally aware of it, but they didn't say anything because the leader of the matter was Xiaoran. As long as he didn't agree, it would be useless for them to agree. Just when Xiaoran was about to finish speaking, a disciple boldly stood up and asked, "Master Xiao, the 5 regions competition has begun, and all the major forces have rushed to the center of Wuchen. Are we also?" "Yes, Master Xiao," everyone else agreed with this sentence one by one. Xiaoran looked at everyone, waved his hands and said, "Don't worry, I won't give you anything if you go early, it's the same whether you go early or late. I understand, too. You want to watch the battle between geniuses. After all, I was just like you, and I also thrived in this scene. But the rules of the competition are random. If you have already gone there, you won't be able to see them. The seats in front have already been reserved by those powerful people. If we go there now, besides seeing their butts, what else can we see?" Oh! Seeing everyone like this, it was hard to say anything. Seeing that they didn't ask any more questions, Xiaoran said some more important words, and it took him a while to finish them all. Then he led everyone to the center of Wuchen. The center of Wuchen. A huge platform of 100 feet appeared here out of thin air, and the entire field was forged with top crystal stones. If you want to use crystals for such a huge platform, you can imagine how much it will consume. But these crystal stones are not worth mentioning at all to Tiangong. Just when everyone is talking. At this moment, a man with sword-shaped eyebrows and starry eyes, sharp edges and corners, and a smile on his face appeared on the giant stage. The white cloud-flying clothes all represent his identity as the messenger of the heavenly palace. Everyone looked up, their eyes gradually showing a respectful look. Then he prostrated in succession, "See the lord of the Tiangong territory." The deafening sound resounded throughout Wuchen. The person on the stage is none other than Nan Xiao, the lord of Tiangong territory. His own strength has reached the level of the Emperor realm. Not to mention his identity, as far as the Emperor realm world is concerned, he is worthy of everyone's worship. In addition to Suanman, Guman and other forces. This is also the reason why Xiaoran doesn't want to come so early. He has no interest in paying homage to the people of the heavenly palace. They are not worthy yet. After everyone paid their respects to Nanxiaoran, Profound Heaven Sect and others slowly arrived. Naturally, someone saw them, but they couldn't say anything other than showing angry faces. At this time, Nan Xiao, who was on the stage, said softly, "Okay, this domain master doesn't want to say any more nonsense. From now on, the 5-domain competition officially begins." The words fell. An unknown stone appeared in Nan Xiao's hand. I saw him throw it on the stage. In an instant, the stone began to erupt with the power of space, and the space spirit weapon above the giant field, in conjunction with the stone, began to exert their effects. This 5-domain competition will be held within space, and the strength will be limited to that of Wuzong. This also means that even if you are a strong martial emperor, you can participate, but how can a strong martial emperor fight with juniors? At this time, a clear-spirited woman's voice reached everyone's ears. In the first game, Suanman Saint Child Zhang Xuanyi will challenge Guojing, the direct disciple of the evil emperor, the leader of the Black Demon Sect. As soon as he finished speaking, the old men from several factions in front opened their eyes. Two men wearing Taoist robes and black robes appeared on the scene, with a hint of fighting intent in their expressions, and were then teleported into the space. A screen similar to a ghost appeared in front of everyone. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of Fantasy, Obtain the Sect System. Author, Red General. Chapter 89. Zhang Xuanyi looked at the man in black robe in front of him and said with a smile, Guojing, we haven't seen each other for a few years, right? I wonder, in the past few years that I haven't seen you, have you improved much in your cultivation? If your strength is still at the martial king stage dash. The sarcastic words fell into Guojing's ears. Hearing this, Guojing glanced at her and said coldly, why are you talking so much nonsense? Don't you know it after a fight? Sure enough, you still have such a bad mouth, Zhang Xuanyi smiled. Come on. Let me see your strength. The words fell. A shining golden sword appeared in Zhang Xuanyi's hand. It is 3 feet and 8 inches in length. The sword is covered with rhombus-shaped gold patterns and has the word inscribed in bird seal script. Ancient Dragon Sword. Guojing's eyes suddenly shrank across from him. It's a pretty good spirit weapon, he couldn't help but nodded and murmured. In that case, I have to take out the spirit weapon that I have handy. The words fell. A ghastly long knife appeared in his hand. The blade was like a mirror, reflecting Guojing's indifferent face. Looking at the long knife in his hand, Guojing's indifferent face revealed a smile. This sword is called Yuyan. In an instant, the light and shadow of swords appeared in the space. Bang bang bang. Boom. The two of them each took 10 steps back. Zhang Xuanyi looked slightly surprised, then looked at Guojing and said, I didn't expect your strength to reach martial sovereign. It seems that I underestimated you. Humph, underestimating someone's character can lead to death. Show your true strength, Guojing just replied indifferently. Snort. Suanman third layer, Zhang Xuanyi murmured softly. Wow. Bah. In an instant, Zhang Xuanyi's whole body began to glow with blue spiritual energy. He waved his palm and injected all the spiritual energy into the sword body. Boom. The ancient dragon sword flashed with golden light, and the blue aura gathered into a ferocious tiger. He looked towards the opposite side, aimed at Guojing and struck forward. Wow! The sharp sword energy rushed toward Guojing's neck like thunder. Looking at the rushing sword energy, Guojing's expression did not change. He touched the long knife in his hand and waited until the sword energy came closer. The palm of his hand moved. Raise the long knife and hit it hard. Guojing was knocked back 3 steps. He took a slight breath, then wrapped his aura around the long knife in his hand, and slashed 3 times in a row. Wow! 3 dark blades rushed forward with a deathly sound. Wherever the blade passed, there was a harsh sound. You want to confuse me with false moves? That's a good idea. Zhang Xuanyi sneered and stood there without making any next move. Sure enough, 3 blades struck him, no different from the air. Sure enough, I guessed it right, Zhang Xuanyi smiled slightly. He raised his eyes and looked in the direction of Guojing, his expression changed involuntarily. Because Guojing's figure is no longer where he was. Before Zhang Xuanyi could make the next move, a sneer sounded behind him. Do you really think I'm just using this trick to confuse you? Say it. Puff. The blade of the knife actually penetrated Zhang Sui's chest, before Guojing could continue to taunt him. There was no him on Zhang Xuanyi's chest, and the imaginary blood spurting turned into streaks of spiritual energy that began to dissipate. His face couldn't help but look shocked. You got fooled. The words fell. The billowing spiritual energy rushed towards Guojing's back like a flood. Don't underestimate this spiritual energy. As long as you dare to get a trace of it, your skin will be penetrated directly. This is much easier to use than poisonous gas. Ah! Guojing's left hand was directly contaminated, and the spiritual energy continued to corrode his arm until he saw flesh, blood, and bones. Puff! Black blood spat out from Guojing's mouth. Don't wait for him to curse angrily. Another sword wind rushed towards him. Damn it! Guojing no longer looked so calm now. Use the remaining spiritual energy to continuously gather into the blade, and then raise the sword to directly block the sword wind. But due to the injury, he couldn't use the remaining spiritual energy to resist, and he had to use part of his spiritual energy to block the erosion in his arm. Boom! Guojing was knocked to the ground by the sword wind, half kneeling. But he also tried his best not to kneel down with both legs, holding the handle of the knife with one hand and inserting it into the ground to hold on. He is from the Black Demon Sect, how can he kneel down? You must learn to use your brain. Zhang Xuanyi's sarcastic laughter reached his ears again. The next moment, in the space, a group of people gathered together in a certain direction. The figure in Taoist robes was none other than Zhang Xuanyi. Before Guojing could say anything, Zhang Xuanyi raised his sword and shouted. The edge of the sword breaks the fury. The golden spiritual energy turned into hundreds of sword energy, surrounding Zhang Xuanyi in a circle. Then, as if it had eyes, it rushed straight around Guojing. Guo was shocked to see the scene and wanted to move, but the pain of spiritual corrosion had penetrated into his heart and bones. How could he have the strength to stop him? Helpless, I could only reluctantly raise the blade and try my best to block it. The golden sword energy rushed straight into his body, blocking dozens of swords, but could he block hundreds of swords? It can't be stopped at all. Everything was Zhang Xuanyi's plan. The initial ridicule was just to make Guojing Quan pay attention to his clone. He had already been hiding in the void since entering the space, watching the fight between Guojing and his clone. Ah! Boom! With wounds all over his body, Guojing finally couldn't hold on anymore and fell to the ground. Outside world. A lone bird with two wings stopped in mid-air. I saw an immortal Taoist man, wearing a yellow Taoist robe, an old man who was almost elderly but full of energy, standing on the back of the lone bird. Seeing this scene, the old man smiled, turned to look at the people beside him, and said mockingly, "Did you see, this is my Suanman saint child, such a plan, how can you, the Black Demon Sect, only rely on brute force, people will snort." Hearing the old man's ridicule, the middle-aged man snorted coldly and did not look at him. In fact, he was also a little angry in his heart. He didn't understand why the direct disciple of the dignified sect master lost like this. Profound Heaven Sect. Xiao Ran nodded when he saw the scene and said, "Yes, the strategy is more appropriate." "Does that mean that this person named Zhang Xuanyi won?" a disciple asked carefully. Xiao Ran turned to look at him and found that he was the disciple who was eager to come over before. "I can't tell this kind of thing yet, but what is certain is that Zhang Xuanyi has won." It was just as Xiao Ran expected. Although Guojing fell to the ground, when Zhang Sui came to alert him, he used all his strength to slash his chest with all his strength, but it was only the last stab. Ahem! A trace of blood spat out on the ground. Zhang Xuanyi looked at Guojing, who was half lying on the ground, and shook his head. He said helplessly, "It seems that I wasn't cautious enough and I got chopped by you." But it's really weird. Guojing glanced at Zhang Xuanyi weakly, and used his last strength to say this. Rebirth of Fantasy, obtain the Sect system. Author, Red General. Chapter 90. Because I have already said that underestimating a person's character will lead to death. The words fell. The space disappeared and two figures appeared in the venue. Seeing the two figures in the crowd, some were excited and some were frustrated. They were excited because Zhang Xuanyi won, but they were frustrated because Guojing lost. Ah, Mr. Guojing actually lost, why on earth? A figure fell to his knees on the ground, punching the ground with his fists, wailing and crying, as if he was mourning. When the middle-aged man outside saw this scene, he hurriedly appeared beside Guojing and hurriedly used his spiritual power to hit Guojing's back, sealing all his injuries. Then he checked Guojing's injuries again, slowly exhaled and disappeared. And the woman's clear voice echoed in everyone's ears again. The winner this time is Suanman Zhang Xuanyi. In the crowd, several handsome men with handsome faces were discussing this scene. I didn't expect Zhang Xuanyi to be stronger than Guojing. Doesn't it mean that Zhang Xuanyi's strength has not broken through martial sovereign? How come Guojing's martial sovereign's cultivation can't be better than his? You don't understand this. Didn't you see that when the two of them were fighting, their breath didn't burst out the whole time? One person nodded, yes. They must have used some hidden treasure. Qi Yunzi, very good. I didn't expect that you Suanman geniuses would have such a plan. I am afraid that you will become as insidious and cunning as the current Suanman master. The old man held his hair and beard, leaned over and said with a chuckle. Qi Yunzi glanced at him coldly and said, do you think anyone will be like your Guji, who only uses strength to suppress others? Don't you understand? When all the strength comes together, it depends on strategy and brains. No wonder he can be pinned down by my Suanman and unable to move. It's really just in name only. You snored. Hearing this, the old man looked a little ugly and pointed at Qi Yunzi. He paused for a moment before putting it down, turned around and said nothing more. Gug, it's just rubbish. Sooner or later, my Suanman will make you disappear from this world. Qi Yunzi smiled coldly, with a hint of disdain. Say it. In the crowd, everyone is still talking about the battle between Zhang Xuanyi and Guojing, so as to know how to deal with it in the future. The voice of the Qingling woman rang in my ears again. In the second game, Yang Yunliu, the personal disciple of the master of the ancient pavilion, will challenge Suanman Saint Child Zhang Xuanyi. The words fell. Everyone stopped talking and looked into the mirror in front of them. Two daoist figures slowly emerged in the space. Yang Yunliu, Zhang Xuanyi frowned and looked at the beautiful woman in front of him. Her skin is as good as snow, she is wearing a floating skirt, and her eyes are like a pool of clear water. When she looks at her, she has an elegant and noble temperament that makes people take pictures of her, feel ashamed, and dare not blaspheme. A long sword appeared in Yang Yunliu's hand. The sword is 2 feet and 1 inch long. The blade is made of black iron and is very thin. It exudes a faint cold light. The hilt is a golden phoenix, which looks extremely gorgeous and majestic. The blade is so sharp that it looks like a real blade like autumn frost. Zhang Xuanyi pondered for a while, his face became playful, he looked at Yang Yunliu and said, Sister Yunliu, we haven't seen you for a few months, don't bully your brother, he can't beat you. Yang Yunliu glanced at him with beautiful eyes, her face always remained cold. He opened his mouth and said, I will not show mercy in this competition, and you don't have to call me sister. There is no blood relationship between the two of us. The words were cold, but Zhang Xuanyi always kept a smile on his face. Then, blue spiritual power began to emit from his body. He clenched his fists and smiled, in that case, sister, please be careful, my brother's sword is much sharper than yours. The words fell. Zhang Xuanyi's figure disappeared instantly. Yang Yunliu's eyebrows suddenly moved, and his eyes scanned the surroundings. Sudden. A sword sound came into her ears from behind. Yang Yunliu's expression remained unchanged. He moved his jade hand and the sword directly blocked the blow. Then his spiritual power evaporated and he aimed it at a certain place in the nearby void and struck it hard. Bang! A shadow appeared in front of her. "Sister, be careful." The words fell. Zhang Xuanyi raised his foot and kicked him. This time he did not use sword skills. Boom! This kick was directly caught by Yang Yunliu, with a cold look in his beautiful eyes. Hundreds of spiritual swords appeared all around Zhang Xuanyi instantly. Thousands of miles from the red sky, Yang Yunliu shouted. "Wow!" Swish! Moment. The spiritual swords all around stabbed at Zhang Xuanyi. A white spiritual snake also appeared behind him, but it was just a shadow. Among the spiritual snakes was a snow-white sword. It was waiting for Zhang Xuanyi to take action. Then Zhang Xuanyi would be really in danger. Got it? Zhang Xuanyi frowned. He knew that he had been surrounded by spiritual swords. Feeling the killing intent behind him, Zhang Xuanyi did not hesitate any longer. He quickly turned his body and attacked the white snake behind him. The white snake was cut off instantly, but the blade inside did not disappear. The sword is filled with chills. Bang bang bang. He dealt with the surrounding spiritual swords one by one, and then Zhang Quanyi quickly retreated to the right and used Suanmen third layer again. Blue spiritual power began to envelope Zhang Xuanyi's body. His eyes turned cold. Break the blade with one punch without waiting for him to turn around. Yang Yunliu had already arrived behind Zhang Xuanyi. Without hesitation, he stabbed his sword straight into Zhang Xuanyi's chest. Ah! After a moment of pause, Zhang Xuanyi's face twisted. He turned to look at Yang Yunliu and said with a sad smile, "Sister, you really don't hesitate." Ah! Ha! Boom! The spiritual power burst out completely, knocking Yang Yunliu aside, then pulled out the sword stabbed in the chest with his hand, turned around and threw it towards Yang Yunliu. Swish! Yang Yunliu reacted, turned around, and caught it with one hand. Zhang Xuanyi's laughter came. "Sister, you have beaten enough, now it's my brother's turn to fight back." The words fell. Zhang Xuanyi's face became cold. Somewhere in the space, a golden sword engraved with the word rushed towards Yan Jianliu with the roar of a dragon. Looking up, the ancient dragon sword rushed forward like a giant dragon. Chi! Aha! Puff! Huh! Huh! Yang Yunliu's hair fell down and she gasped slightly. She looked at her chest and saw that a sharp sword was being pierced into her chest. The tip of the sword is in front and the hilt is in the back. "Sister Yunliu, you lost," Zhang Xuanyi came over and said coldly. Yang Yunliu shook his fainted head and pulled out the ancient dragon sword with force. In an instant, blood spurted out uncontrollably. It dyed her robe red and fell to the corners. The words fell. The space the two of them were in disappeared. Outside, two figures appeared in the field. A smile appeared on Qi Yun's face, and he glanced at the old man who had just ridiculed him.